Kingdom responsibility. We really a follow-up thought to what we were talking about last month and that previous sermon is what is the kingdom of God like? I think I'm feeling like there's a flow that I want to sort of stay in maybe for a few months in regards to these monthly meetings and talking about the kingdom of God, trying to get an understanding of the kingdom that is not heady and theological only. Because I think sometimes we use these terms and we understand them, but we not know how they live. We don't know how to practically live that out. So we go, well, I believe in the kingdom. Well, what believer doesn't believe in the kingdom? But what does that look like? What does that sound like? How does it even matter? Is it something to inherit later? Do you get that now? And so we don't have to use every writer's book and we don't have to go through everybody's commentary to get an idea of at least what the text tells us about understanding the kingdom. We do need to dig, sort of like peeling the onion, we need to dig below the surface and realize there's some more things there. When you see something like kingdom responsibility, people get scared. We've had a real backlash against the word responsibility in the church, particularly in the Grace Church. I think that comes from the fact that for so long, most of us come up under some sort of works Christianity. You people better do this or you're going to go to hell. God expects this out of you if you want to be anointed. You better, you oughta, you need to. And when you get pressed beneath that, it takes all the joy and all the life out of just loving God and being loved by God and loving your neighbor. And before long, you're just trying to please God. You're not sure if He's happy with you. That's where you get this cloudy picture of God. He's angry. I'm not good enough. I've sinned too much. Grace helped release us from that. And it's helped make us believe we're righteous. We're sons and daughters. We don't have to worry about if God's happy with us. But what I've noticed is that that's caused a lot of grace communities, finished work communities, to really push back against anything at all that you say, hey, here's what ought to be coming out of you now that you're a believer. And they go, and I've heard people say, well, I don't want to hear anything that starts with ought to or you should. And I get that, because if ought tos and you shoulds lead to righteousness sermons, then who wants to hear that? But ought tos and shoulds populate both the Old and the New Testament. And the New Testament particularly is the one you really want to concentrate on. It says you've been redeemed, you're justified, you're sanctified. There ought to be a certain standard that you live, a certain way that you treat your neighbor. This is Jesus' entire ministries. How are you treating this person? What are you doing to him? How do you respond to this guy? So those are all how we take what's in us and put it out sort of on the table and say, welcome to Jesus. Here's what Jesus is. And what you say is one thing, and then of course what you live is another. And so you can say all you want about the kingdom and things, but then what are we doing to people? And to me, that's the more I examine the ministry of Jesus, the more I see that being lived out. And the more I've dug into the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the more I start to see that lived out. And so don't think of responsibility as heady or weighty. Think of responsibility in terms of this, and this is just sort of, to me, using the phonetic sound of the word to help find the definition. Responsibility to me is the ability, flip it around, it's the ability to respond. How do you respond to the stimuli, to the circumstance, to the attack, to the good, to the bad? Much of Jesus' ministry is talking about those responses, what they look like, what they sound like. And so when you talk about responsibility, it's start with the ability to respond and work from there, rather than, oh, I got to do this. Oh, that's a burden. But what is coming out of you? How are you treating that neighbor? How are you treating that individual around you? So let's start with the thought. The kingdom of God is unlike the kingdoms of the earth. This is really right where we ended last month. This idea, we didn't put this exact paragraph up, but this is the same idea of where we stopped that message. The kingdom of God's unlike the kingdoms of the earth in many ways, the chiefest of which is that the kingdom of God is invisible. That should be the most obvious. The kingdom of God is not something that you can see, whereas the kingdom of, say, your country is definitely something that you can see. Though it's not a tangible person, you look around you, you see the evidence of the kingdoms of this world. The chiefest of which is it's invisible and it's internal. Nearly as important is the fact that the systems of men react, and this is a distinction I want to make, try to go back over and over and over again today. The systems of men react, the kingdom of God responds. And that's just a thought To me, that's trying to break it down into a similar word on each side, kingdoms of the world, kingdoms of God, react, respond, to try to show that there's a contrast in the way that we treat our neighbor and the way that we treat our enemy. Reaction can be something that's intuitive, instinctual, emotional, something you say, well, that's just the way I was raised. You know why we say that's the way I was raised? Because we didn't put any thought into it. To go, well, why'd you say that? Well, that's just the way I was raised. In other words, I'm off the hook. I didn't think about it. It's what come out of me. So in a way, we're kind of trying to drag our entire generation, like our grandparents and our parents, and throw them on and go, yeah, I do that because that's the way I was raised. I don't have to take responsibility for it. That's the way I was raised. That's reaction. Whereas the kingdom of God, you've been transformed. You're a new creation. You're a son, you're a daughter. It's not just the way you were raised. It's not just the country you live in. It's not just that's what it means to be a woman. That's what it means to be a man. That's my natural, these are the terms we use. That's my natural reaction. What do you expect? That's all I know. The kingdom takes us to another level. It's invisible, it's internal, it's not based on dad, granddad, aunts, uncles, culture, language, race, religion. Because it's invisible and because it's internal, it doesn't rely on emotional reactions. There's a different kind of response. It's so different that it's unlike anything else because it's responding from another place.